I often used to see myself and my body from an outsider's perspective, because I always used to sort of see myself not as I am seeing myself, because when I even look in the mirror and I am seeing myself, I feel like there is a crowd there. I do not have to compromise on my pleasure just because I have to have a sexual experience or I have to have any experience with anybody. Hi, I'm Anuja. My pronouns are she, her. And I think there's this line that I use usually when I am like whenever I have to sort of give out my bio, or like, people ask me for like, just give us something about you. And this is something that I've just used everywhere for my work. I am, your quintessential dog person, with a blue typewriter, just living few miles across you, writing about you. And I think, yeah, that's how I do identify as. So I think it started when I, first like questioned myself about what I really want to do, because I did a lot of gigs, a lot of internships, a lot of work with a lot of different, organizations in the sexual wellness field, the menstrual wellness field, in, the mental health field. So I think, and sort of understanding the overlaps, because I feel like to understand intersections and overlaps was important for me, and it really helped me to navigate my, how I am going about my journey in this sector really well. Because I think when we sort of talk about, say, sexual wellness, it's important to understand that there are a lot of layers to it, that there are a lot of facets to it. And I think mental health is one of those things, because, all of these aspects of your health is sort of intertwined together. And I think for me, that switch to happen, for me to sort of pursue psychology, for me to, have that trajectory defined, for me to, do my undergrad, do my masters, and then, just, start practicing maybe, or, do my MPhil, go ahead and practice as a psychologist. But I think for me to make that switch was easier, because for some reason, I think how I really started to come into this field is when I started to have conversations with the people around me, and how they felt that, this was a safe space to do that, and for me to offer that safe space at first felt like, okay, maybe this is one of those things that you do when, you have to practice, finally sit there, on the other side and sort of hear these things. But then slowly I realized that, okay, I'm also open to having conversations about them. About these, the concerns about, just sexual wellness in general, about, something like masturbation, about pleasure, all these things, and, how to be inclusive at it, because now we can't just talk about it in terms of, this is this is that, this is ABC. I feel like we also have to go beyond, sort of talk about how we are also, being inclusive about it, because that's the bare minimum thing that we can do at this point. And I think with my parents, to explain them this switch was harder than I had to do it, for my friends or for myself, because I think for me, it came very naturally to me. It was just like, I don't have the word for it, but I think like a calling, some sort of, just something inside me was like, what, I want to do this. And I feel home while doing this. I think there's no other way to describe it. And then when I used to, have conversations with my friends, they were very receptive. Luckily, I was privileged to have those people around me who were very receptive to it, and they were actually glad about it. I think I got a lot of unwanted attention from cis men, sort of putting you, like immediately like sexualizing you, fetishizing you about, stuff like this, because just because you're talking about, say, massagers, or, you're talking about using a lube, you're immediately somebody who is just, ready for sex, somebody who is, just there. So I think for me, to navigate through those conversations was the harder part. I think for me, it came naturally to me. For the people that I really trust, my close friends, I think it was really easy. But with my parents, it was a harder conversation, but I had it. And now I remember with my dad, he was really interested to read one of my pieces. I was more than happy to offer it to him. And he after sort of reading maybe the first few paragraphs, he told me that I don't understand it because I don't have the vocabulary for it. I said, you know what? I will not force you or make you sit down to understand it. When you know that you want to and you are ready for it, come to me and we will have a conversation, and I would love to actually talk to you about it and sort of help you develop that vocabulary. So yeah, I think the journey to sort of have that resentment going on within my family, to sort of them being open about my work, I think that has been really well. For me, it has been something very natural, but I think just to sort of navigate that through a society which is just maybe opening up, if not closed enough, to the field of sexual wellness or just the idea of sexual wellness, I think that is a little hard, but it does come with its own pro. I think just sort of coming to work every day knowing that maybe one person can actually get educated, I think that is very gratifying. I think for me, when I started writing, for TST, I think my first ideas, my first pitches were about my own lived experiences. And even outside of, TST, when I started, was writing for different platforms, and, these were, good, like maybe some media platforms or some, platforms within the sexual wellness field, I think one thing that always used to go ahead whenever I'm sort of processing how I'm going about, writing, sort of, ideating about ideas, pitches, I think one thing that always goes on in my head is that how can I, sort of work upon my lived experiences? How can I sort of bring them to life so that, because at first, instead of me looking for inspiration outside or for, just waiting to sort of like that creativity, sport to sort of hit me, why don't I use my lived experiences, the trauma that I have faced and sort of have healed from or am currently healing from, to sort of put it down for people who might actually resonate with that experience, who might gain the vocabulary for it. So I think for me, inclusion, including people always meant including myself into that conversation. And even if, I am working with people, whose lived experience is really, really, really away from, my lived experiences, I would always try to find a way that how can I contribute in the smallest possible way. What is the bare minimum, and also how can I go beyond that? And I think I remember I wrote this piece about trigger warning, about sexual grooming, and I think that was one of the pieces that really opened me up to how this is something that's not that talked about. This is a very common experience for a lot of survivors, and a lot of them never had the vocabulary for it. The number of messages I got on my DM about how, this is just one, this is tons of messages coming in and just one common theme throughout, how they did not have the language for it, how they did not know this experience is called grooming, and to just know and have the word for it, it meant something to them because they felt seen. Their struggle, what they went through with different people, different, perpetuators, abusers, even if they don't hold them culpable, at least having that language for themselves so that they can have their own journey of healing, or at least start somewhere. I think for me, that was really important, and that's where I realized that when I am talking about inclusion, I also have to include myself in some way, because yes, like you rightfully mentioned, diversity, inclusion, it cannot exist in isolation of who you are as a person and what you're working for, because a lot of it, just the idea of being, inclusive and, diversity affirmative, I think it has to come from within you, your own values, sort of, going into your work. Because I feel like you can't exist as a person outside of work who's not disability affirmative, who's not queer affirmative, and an ally, and then doing that work, it's not being true to yourself. And I think you can't exist like that, like yes, person is political, my profession is also political, all of that has to be. And I think those two things can coexist together, and the values that I learn from my professional life can also flow into my personal life, and vice versa. So yeah. So I think I have definitely sort of found myself in this space. I've literally just found myself in this space, and I think there's a lot of healing, there's a lot of self-growth, there's a lot of realization that has started when I started to work in this, field. And I think for me, it was difficult at first to navigate, because even, as you write, there are a lot of things that hit you, as you write, and like there are a lot of discoveries that you make on the way about yourself, about the world around you. And I think that is something that used to feel a little overwhelming. And I think slowly, putting in conscious effort every day, I started to take in what I'm doing for work, and started to take in those conversations that I have with different people. I started to, imbibe everything that I am consuming on the everyday, and in a way that I'm sort of integrating it into my, understanding of myself and the world, piece by piece. And I think one of the, main ways that working in this field, working with, especially with TST, I think one of the main ways that I have sort of seen that healing being manifested into my everyday life is, of course, first of all, with my body. I think I have been far more receptive. I think one of the first few pieces that I did for TST is about, something like body hair, and I think my journey with my body hair itself has been full of lot of struggles, and a lot of roadblocks. And I think it was a continuous, because I almost always used to think, and I think this is a narrative which has been there since like childhood, you can't shave. This is something that my mom used to say, like, you don't have to shave, like, if the others are shaving, this will make you, mature zyada jaldi. And I used to feel like this is something that used to cause immediate dissonance, because I never understood this. I never understood how wearing, a red bra, how wearing, something like, just getting waxed, or, wearing like a revealing dress is gonna make me mature. And what does she mean by mature? And when she's using that language, what is the thought process that's going behind it? Now, when I was a kid, when I was small, when I was a teen, I think I did not used to, ask these questions. But now that I can reflect back, now that I can actually see through these things, I understand that, okay, this is coming from a shared mindset, like this is something that she's grown up with. Maybe, her mom used to sort of say these things, or maybe somebody in her family, somebody in her circle used to say these things to her. Maybe she's grown up with these things, seeing these things around her. So I understand that, and I think that's the empathy part of it. But I think for me to sort of literally snap out of these notions about my body, about how I am being perceived, about how I'm being judged, because I often used to see myself and my body from an outsider's perspective, because I always used to sort of see myself not as I am seeing myself, because when I even look in the mirror and I am seeing myself, I feel like there is a crowd there. There are cameras on me, that are constantly monitoring me. Even as I'm sitting right here, there are thoughts in my head like, is my fat showing? Is my double chin, showing in the camera? Is my hair okay? Is my lipstick, worn off? So there are these thoughts, intrusive thoughts that always go around in my head. And I think I have to, it's a constant process to, tune yourself out of it, or sort of just accept it and move on, and sort of tell myself, give myself a little nudge that, what, even if it is, it's okay. Breathe. And I think for me to do that process every day, that is something that has come as a reward while I've been working. And I think about my relationship with my partners, my relationship with, say, pleasure, I think that has transformed. Like, that entire definition has transformed, because from where I come, having majority of my experiences with cishet men, I think it was a journey. I really don't have words for it, but it was a journey. And I think if I were to sort of just talk about that, that would be like an hour-long rant in itself. So I think for me to sort of understand that I do not have to compromise on my pleasure just because I have to have a sexual experience or I have to have any experience with anybody. I think for me to understand that I am going to prioritize my pleasure, and probably not at the cost of, I'm not gonna compromise on pleasure at the cost of one particular person. I think those two things can exist together. And I think it's about time that we understand that we don't have to let go of, say, pleasure because there's this partner that I have invested a lot in this relationship. I think for us to have that conversation is difficult. And it can be difficult initially, it can be difficult when you're sort of right into it in a relationship, a monogamous relationship. I think it can even be difficult, say, after 10 years, My parents are married and they still have not had one conversation about pleasure. I think if I'm right now to sit with my mom and talk about pleasure or talk about, say, the clitoris, my mom is just gonna look at me, mouth gaping. Why are we talking about this, Why now? And I think I can't even begin to sort of have this conversation with my dad. I only began to sort of have these conversations with my brother, my younger brother, who's like 5 years younger to me, because I want him to reflect on these things early on. Because I think once, he's in school, he's already having these experiences. Once he's in college, I think, he's going to have a lot more. And he's going to have a lot more freedom, a lot of independence to sort of try different things out. So I think, for him to understand these things, for him to have the resources, for him to know that there's a safe space back at home where he can come back, and sort of explore, and sort of talk about these things. Because I think I did not sort of have these resources. I did not have the kind of safety, in terms of talking. I did not have the trust in the people who were, literally around me 24/7. So for me, I had to do the homework myself. I had to educate myself. I had to work in this field. I had to learn every day. But I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I put in the work. But if I can make it a little bit easier for, say my brother or for, say, anybody around me, just as simple as offering them a resource, as simple as offering them a read, I think that is, of course, the bare minimum, but that also means something to me. So yeah, I think in terms of prioritizing pleasure, in terms of prioritizing things that bring me joy, I think now I have sort of reached a phase where, I know what exactly I want. I know where to look for it, and I know how to look for it. And I know that I don't have to constantly look for something, because this is something that I used to struggle with, coping with my trauma. I used to seek stimulation, and that stimulation could come in the form of alcohol. It could come in the form of, say, sex. So I think for me to sort of heal from that, understand how emotional intimacy works for me, not just sexual intimacy, and that these two things can coexist without romantic intimacy coming in, or all three can coexist at the same time or with different people, because I am non-monogamous and I'm still finding my place somewhere, So I think for me to come to terms with all these different aspects of me, of who, how I am as a person, who I am as a person, I think a lot of it I can happily, proudly contribute to my journey in this space, in the sexual wellness space. So yeah. This is something that I've sort of not really thought about, but I've left this as an open window. for me to sort of explore later, because I think even if I do sit in a room and I practice, I think my practice is always going to be affirmative of the values that I have picked up from here, because I think I want to give my all to this space. I want to learn everything that I possibly can from this space and even continue learning. But whatever I take back, and even if I switch and I also go into, practice, I will take all these values with me and ensure that these are reflecting into my practice, because this is who I am as a person. And I feel like these, I'm glad and I'm actually really happy that, as a person, whatever values I hold is also something that my, professional life seeks from me. And I think a lot of people feel conflicted. I think every time I tell people how healthy my work environment is, the only answer I get is that they can't relate. And I think that's something, I understand, and I do feel grateful. I really do. I feel like I'm really privileged to be here. But of course, I've done my hard work, but I do feel I'm really privileged to be here. But of course, I think, this culture of, being in toxic environments has to be sort of like, not normalized anymore. Like, you don't have to work in spaces, like if you of course have the opportunities to, diverge, but you don't have to work in spaces that restrict your growth. Because I think your personal growth, if your professional life is restricting your personal growth, is it really worth, going that? Because, and I know that I'm saying this from a very, very privileged stance, because I know there are a lot of people who are in different professions because they don't want to be, but they have to sustain. But if you do have the resources to sort of go ahead, sort of experiment, and you can do it, you should do it. I was privileged enough to have the resources to switch, to move from one field to another field, which again, there is not a lot of gap in. All of these things are overlapping, all of these fields are overlapping. The work that they're doing sort of flows into one another, which I absolutely love, adore, and also bring into my work. But yes, I think therapy is something, practicing it is something that I know that even if I do, not given it a lot of thought, but even if I do, I know the values that I have imbibed and will keep on imbibing will always flow into my practice. And even as somebody who's practicing, I would make sure that I am doing my research, I am doing my bit, updating myself, keeping myself updated, and just keep all these values flowing into my work, so that, because now, yeah, like I said, this is who I am.
Like what you saw? Support us so we can create more empowering content for you. Like and share this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel.